All right, here we go. Welcome to the IlmTech Podcast, everyone. Today we are continuing our Center for Neurotechnology series, and I've got sitting across from me today the center's executive director, Professor Eric Chudler. And, super excited. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks.
So, when I was, Googling a picture for you to record, to promote the podcast and everything on my Instagram page, one of the big ones that came up was you with the Emmy Award.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, where does a professor get an Emmy, So what's the story behind that?
Yes, that was a project that I started probably about 10 years ago. It's part of my education efforts. I was trying to think of other ways to reach people and get them to know more about neuroscience. And so one of the ways that people get information is through TV and video. So I thought of making a TV show. And so I came up with the idea of calling the show BrainWorks. And I got a grant from the University of Washington Royalty Research Fund back then to make a show, and this particular one that I made about 10 years ago, it was nominated, but it didn't win an Emmy. And that project kind of sat on the shelf for a while, and it was resurrected about 4 years ago or so. And I received some funding from the Dana Foundation and a couple other places to make more episodes. And in fact, that episode that won the Northwest Emmy was about exercise in the brain.
Okay.
And just within the past couple weeks, I wrapped up another show. It's being edited right now. It's all about sleep in the brain.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. So it seems to me that that you're kind of that guy, the education guy, the guy who's like really involved in trying to get in outreach programs for like the high schoolers. You run the program here for the undergraduates and everything like that. So, and reading all the kinds of stuff you're reading, the books you've written, a lot of them geared towards younger kids and all that kind of stuff. How did you become that guy? What was the journey like?
Oh, well, I guess it started back when I was a real little kid because both of my parents were teachers.
Yeah.
So my mom and dad were elementary school teachers, and my dad went on to become a vice principal, then a principal of elementary school.
Right.
And this was way back in the 60s. My dad tried to introduce some more radical ideas into his school. It was just a public school.
Okay.
And he decided to take away grades. He said none of the kids should have grades. And
none at all?
No grades. And he said all the people that teach the kids should be experts in their field. So for example, even in elementary school, when a teacher is teaching science, that teacher should be an expert in science.
Oh, wow.
When a teacher teaches math, that teacher should be a math expert. And so he tried to establish some of these new teaching ideas. You may have heard the concept of schools without walls. So students could move around and experts would be teaching. So my dad had a lot of ideas about education. And in fact, in the late 60s, he was part of the Los Angeles Unified School District, the public school system there. And because he had some of these radical ideas, he got in trouble.
Right.
And he got in trouble by his superintendent, who called him into his office and said, "What are you trying to do in your school? What will happen when these kids who are reading above their level in elementary school, what will you be teaching them when they get into middle school or junior high school?" And my dad just thought that was a bizarre thing to say because he wanted students to learn at whatever level they could learn.
So the argument is that if they learn things really quickly, then they won't have anything to learn later on.
Yeah, which is a bizarre
ridiculous,
idea.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. So what he did is he actually quit.
Okay.
And we moved to Malaysia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I went to elementary school in Malaysia, and then my dad came back and the whole family came back to Los Angeles for 1 year where he tried it again, and then he decided to take an early retirement, and we moved to Japan.
Okay.
So I went to high school in Japan.
Oh, interesting.
And in fact, my high school language on my high school transcripts is Japanese, is my language that I learned. So anyways, being around my parents who were educators, I think, instilled in me the importance of educating others. So when I had my own kids, I decided to give back. And so when my daughter, who's now 29 years old, was in preschool, the teachers asked parents to come in and help out and maybe talk to the kids about their job and what they did. So when she was, my daughter, 3 or 4 years old, I went into her classroom and I sort of did a show and tell about the brain.
Oh, okay.
And so I decided to, do different ideas and hands-on activities. In fact, the very, very first thing that I did to teach the kids about the senses was that I had a plastic bag full of Dorito chips. These
always good
chips, yeah. And so I brought out one chip, and there was probably maybe 15 kids. These are, again, 3, 4, maybe 5 years old kids at the time. And I brought out one chip, and I asked the kids, how do you know this is a chip? And the kids looked at me like I was crazy, but they said, of course, we can see it.
Right.
So I said, that's right. Your eyes and your brain help you see things. And so I ate it. I ate that chip, and they thought that was really funny.
Yeah.
And so I took out another chip, and I said, okay, I can see it, and I can know that this is a chip. How else can I find out that this is a chip? And they said, well, you can taste it, and you'll know it's a chip. So I put it in my mouth, and I ate it, and they thought that was funny.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I brought out more and more chips, and we went through the 5 senses that way. Okay. And I said, that's what our senses do. Our senses bring in information from the outside world. Our brain has to understand what it's doing, and that's how we know things. And so I started off with these very, very simple experiments and these very simple demos, and other teachers at the school started to know that I would do this because I would come in several times. Right. And I would follow my daughter from year to year to her different classes, and I would always sort of change my ideas or modify my ideas. And other teachers would hear about this, and they would invite me into their classrooms.
Okay.
So I would develop these activities, and then finally, to share it with more people, I created a website. And that website was called Neuroscience for Kids, which is still active and available now. All the ideas that I ever came up with are all on that website, just free to download and free for teachers and parents and homeschoolers or anybody around the world to use.
So when you're teaching kids or you're doing these events or demos or whatever, how engaged do they get with the content? Because I'm thinking right now, there's this idea in education that, like, you know, science, neuroscience, or technology, whatever you have, it's for it's for the nerds. It's not cool to learn this kind of stuff, and it's difficult to get kids to be like interested in things that I found, at least like maybe closer to our age, like teenagers and all that. It's really difficult to get them to do things. So I'm curious, how did younger kids take that when you first started doing this kind of stuff?
Yeah, younger kids are just as curious or maybe more curious than older kids or adults. Young kids are like sponges, and you just have to make it understandable to them. You can't use jargon when you talk to them, but they're curious. In fact, I think my favorite group to talk to is maybe upper elementary school kids, because they're still open. There aren't a lot of social pressures on them yet, so they're like sponges, and they just soak it up. But you have to make it fun for them. But everyone has a brain. We're all just naturally curious. Although I do think that if you can come up with a project that somehow included neuroscience, space, and dinosaurs, if you can somehow combine those 3 things in some kind of a project, those 3 things in one project, then I think you'd really have a winner that would attract just about all kids. But it's just a matter of coming up with activities that a student can easily do, that they could find out something new. But it's all kids are natural learners, I think.
Right. So they have that curiosity for, like, just naturally they have that curiosity and the excitement to learn, right? And it seems to me that somewhere along the way that just disappears. And I started thinking recently, maybe is it a problem with the way we educate? Is there a problem in the school system? Like, a lot of the ideas that your dad had about, how to make things better, is that the reason why we just slowly lose that part of ourselves that think, okay, well, I'm not going to be a scientist. I can't be curious, so I'm not going to be curious about this kind of stuff anymore. I don't care about it, all this kind of stuff. So why do you think that happened?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think if anyone had the answer to that, they would solve a lot of the problems in our school system and in our education system. I think that there's a lot of different reasons for why kids lose their interest in science. One is science is not everything, and that all students have different interests.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of competing factors. I mean, there's some activities that kids do that take time away from their school. For example, they might have to get a job. A lot of students like to do sports, so that could take away from some of the academics. There's a lot of other social pressures that are put on kids that maybe have them go in one direction instead of another. But I don't think that there's any easy answers to that question. Certainly, like you and a lot of the other students that are involved in science technology, there was something about perhaps having that spark. I don't know what your experience was
Right.
about why you decided to go one way and what turns other kids off.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, because I've been thinking about this a lot as well, because I also think that, education is, really, really important and maybe not a part of our efforts enough. I mean, I think there's a lot of buzzwords about education, about, different styles and all that, but the observation for me is that the world has advanced so much in so many other ways, but education has remained, like, fundamentally quite similar for a really long time. And it just doesn't seem like that there are people who are enough people who are really working to try to make it better. But in my own case, like, why am I doing things like recording these podcasts? Why am I, doing research and all this kind of stuff? It was like kind of an intrinsic, curiosity and spark, but I don't know why I didn't lose it. Like, if I'm trying to trace my steps back and think, okay, how come I still kept it and other students didn't? I think maybe it was like reading. I really liked reading, and in the small town I grew up in, there was this we had this tiny library, which is really tiny compared to like any library you would have in a school here. I went to a school that was maybe like 300 to 400 students, K through 12. So really, really small school. I graduated with 25 students. So we had this tiny library, and when I was a kid, I would go in there and I would, I'd try to read all these books, and I guess like we had like a big range of stuff. We had like the little kid books that they would bring to us, and the shelves were like the big kid books were there. And I always wanted to go to the big kid books, and I was like, I don't want to have these little kid books or whatever. And they wouldn't let me read them. But eventually, they were like, we took these reading tests or whatever, and it seems that I was able to, get a decent enough score. So they were like, all right, you know what, you can read them. And so I just kept reading, and that was kind of a way to nurture that curiosity, I guess. But in terms of social pressure, maybe I didn't have much because I didn't have very many friends when I was that age. I was by nature a very shy kid. I'm totally different now. Now I love talking to people. I can give a speech in front of 200, 300 people and be totally relaxed. So it's completely different now. But at the time I was very, very shy. And so because I was reading so much, I think that's kind of why I kept that. And in the absence of like social pressures, social media, all this kind of stuff, like when you don't have that many friends and you have books, it sounds bad, right? But maybe that's one of the reasons it worked out. And then I started making more friends as I grew older, but I had that strong foundation, I think, of just being curious about things. So
yeah, well, if you were at one of my dad's school, you would have full access to all the big kids books, even when you were small.
Right, that's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, and I think that's what some people need, is that they need role models. I mean, so they need role models. They need someone to show them that it's possible. And here at the University of Washington, we have a student group called the University of Washington Neuroscience Community Outreach Group. And this is a group of mainly graduate students, but I believe undergrads also participate in outreach activities. And I think it's really important that they get out into the community and we bring kids in to show them that they too can be scientists. And so if you provide these types of role models to young kids, they can see that it's something that they can do and that it's something that they can follow.
Right, that is achievable. I think that this is a really big thing, is like confidence. And maybe that's one thing I neglected to mention, that maybe there's a lot of people who want to do it, like inside deep down, but they just don't have the confidence to go and do it. Maybe their confidence is beaten out by maybe like a difficult class they took where they didn't get the grades they wanted, or other things. I feel very few people are actually confident enough to pursue what they are interested in. And I think maybe I had a decent amount of confidence because when you grow up in a really small town environment, you get a lot of attention from teachers, especially like if you happen to do well at something, then the teachers you because you have like a closer bond with them, I guess, you connect more and they can kind of uplift you a little bit more and you have a little bit more confidence. And I think that's what it is. People are really afraid. Everyone has this thing that they're just afraid of it deep down, and maybe that's one of the big reasons, right? So then the other challenge becomes, how do you teach someone to not be afraid? Right. And it's difficult.
Yeah, well, and a lot of it is opportunity. Giving people the opportunity. But we shouldn't neglect the fact that, science is not easy.
Yeah.
It is not easy, but I think that everyone is capable with the right training and background and experience and opportunity. And unfortunately, some of those opportunities, one of the things that is very difficult in my job here is I often get emails from students who want research experience.
Right.
And those are the fantastic opportunities. And there's a limited number of labs here at the University of Washington.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there aren't enough labs to accommodate all the students for every single student that wants to do research.
Mm-hmm.
And so oftentimes I say, well, you just have to wait a semester until one student graduates and until a position opens up. And so, unfortunately, I can't find research experiences for all of them. But as you know, this summer we have summer availability of labs. Here at the Center for Neurotechnology, we have about 12, 13 UW students that are working in labs and are getting paid.
Yeah.
And we have about 13 students from outside the University of Washington that are getting research experiences here. So there are programs like this at the University of Washington elsewhere in the country.
Mm-hmm.
So students that can't get into one program, hopefully there'll be a place for them someplace else.
Right, and I think it's one of the U.S. is one of the best places in the world for research. And I think a lot of people who grew up here don't realize what a great wealth of opportunities there is over here compared to other countries. Like where I grew up, you didn't have stuff like this. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, that's another one, because I've lived overseas quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think it's very important that American students have experience outside the United States,
mm-hmm.
because oftentimes American students or Americans in general don't understand how the world sees Americans.
Right.
And I think I think it's important that not just to travel as tourists, but I think Americans, sometime maybe during a high school experience, they should take a semester abroad, or as a
mm-hmm.
college student do a semester abroad, just to live outside the United States and get an idea about how other people live and about other people's cultures, because sometimes I think we're very insular and we don't understand how we're viewed from the outside.
Yeah.
And I think not only is that good for the people that in the other countries to see Americans, but I think it's important for Americans to see how other people live. And that can actually influence and inform how we as Americans behave here in our own country, and maybe even get ideas about how other people think, which may even influence the way we work and the way we do our research. And I think that just seeing how other people live and work is very, very important for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree completely. We have it pretty good here in the United States.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think we take it for granted, and maybe that's another reason why we should, go outside of our own comfort zone sometimes.
So you just said something interesting about like how those experiences can kind of inform the way we do research. How much does your background affect your own personal research? I guess can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, my training has been very, very well. As you probably have talked to other scientists, everyone has a very unique background. I don't know anybody that's a cookie cutter.
Yeah.
There is no. But my own background, when I was in high school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I kind of liked animals. I kind of liked science, but as I mentioned before, both of my parents were teachers. I think my dad was history, and my mom maybe studied English. But none of them had any idea about what it was to become a scientist. So in high school, I took a marine biology class as an elective, and it was taught, I still remember his name. His name was Mr. Falb, was his name. And he taught all about, animals in the ocean, and I thought that was kind of interesting. And because at the time I was living in Los Angeles, I thought that maybe I can get a job at the beach. And my dad said to me, "What kind of a job are you going to get at the beach?" He thought maybe I would be a lifeguard or something like that.
Yeah.
And I said, "No, but maybe I can get a job, somewhere in the ocean, maybe working for an oil company, making sure they don't destroy the environment or something like that." But that really didn't work. And because I was in Los Angeles, I decided to go to UCLA. So as an undergraduate at UCLA, my first 2 years, I was an undeclared major. And
First 2 years.
First 2 years, I had no major. I kind of took science classes. I took calculus. I took physics. I took my chemistry classes, but I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. And it wasn't until my junior year I took a psychology class, and it was taught by a physiological psychologist. Back in that day, there was no such thing as neuroscience.
Okay.
So, but this was a physiological psychology. It was introductory psychology, but taught by a physiological psychologist, and his name was Dr. Libeskind. And he was one of the first to study the brain's own mechanism to reduce pain. So in times of stress, the brain releases the endorphins, which is a neurochemical that endogenous opioids, which reduce pain in times of stress. And he was one of the first to investigate this line of research. And this was a giant class he was teaching of 300 students or so. And after class, he said, any students that are interested in what I had to say, come see me after class. And I was one of the few that went up to him after class and said, hey, that was kind of interesting. And he invited a couple students back to the lab. And I was really one of the only ones to kind of stick around. And he introduced me to some of the graduate students, some of the postdocs at the time. And the next day, I was an undergraduate researcher in his lab. And for the next 2 years, I worked in his lab as an undergraduate researcher. And I even published papers as an undergraduate from the work that I did in his lab. And right before I was going to graduate from UCLA, he said, what are you going to do next? And I said, I don't know. What are you supposed to do after you graduate? And he said, there's this thing called a graduate school. And I said, what's graduate school? And he said, well, you go to school for another 4 or 5 more years. I said, school for another 4 or 5 more years? I've just graduated from high school. It took me 12 years.
Yeah.
I was at UCLA for 4 years. What do I want to go to school for another 4 or 5 more years? He said, well, what you do is research. And you're kind of good at this research thing, so why don't you do that? So I came up here to the University of Washington, and my PhD, I have a master's degree and a PhD in psychology is what my PhD is in.
Okay.
But I'm not a psychologist as a lot of people think of psychologists. You know, I'm a neuroscientist. So even though my PhD is in psychology, I'm a neuroscientist. And then after my PhD, I went to work at the National Institutes of Health. And while I was at the National Institutes of Health for my postdoc, I was in the Dental Institute. So my PhD is in psychology, but I'm not really a psychologist.
Yeah.
My postdoctoral fellowship was in a dental institute.
I remember seeing that on your CV. I was like, what?
Yeah. And I'm not a dentist. And then after that, I went up to Boston, and I was in the Department of Neurosurgery there, but I'm not a neurosurgeon. And then I got on faculty here at the University of Washington. My first appointment was in the Department of Anesthesiology, which is where my lab still is. And in 1998, I got a joint appointment in the Department of Bioengineering, which is where my current core appointment is.
Yeah.
So to get back to your original question, you know, about my background, I come from a lot of different places and a lot of different academic backgrounds.
Yeah.
And each of those places have given me an idea and a different way to look at a particular problem, because psychologists look at problems in a different way than bioengineers, who look at it differently than a clinician in anesthesiology, who look at it differently than someone in bioengineering. So all those different backgrounds have allowed me to look at problems from different ways and have given me different methods to use in my research.
Right. So what are you working on right now?
Right now I'm interested in the neuroactive properties of medicinal plants and herbs. So for thousands of years, people have used plants and herbs in medicine. Mm-hmm. So from Africa, the Middle East, from Asia, South America, Europe, North America, all have used plants to treat disease. But Western medicine has sometimes avoided or doesn't know about some of these potential uses of plants and certain chemicals and drugs that come from plants. Certainly we're familiar with some.
Yeah. That's the first thought I had. You said neuroactive properties in plants.
Yeah, certainly there's some that we're well aware of, but there's also some that may work or may not work. And certainly now there's a tremendous interest in the cannabinoids. Here in Washington State, marijuana is now legal for recreational use. There's a huge industry around the country for the non-psychoactive component of the marijuana plant, CBD or cannabidiol. Mm-hmm. Yet there's very little that we know about efficacy. So people are selling this stuff and people say that it works, but is it really working? Is it a placebo? How are these things really working?
It's not clear.
Not clear. And so just within the past year, I asked and I've received a Schedule I drug license. So I'm now approved by the state and also by the federal government to use Schedule I drugs in my research. And I'm interested in some of the properties of cannabinoids, especially how they might have a potential treatment for neurodegenerative diseases, or they may also give us some idea about development. So we don't really know how these might affect developing.
What's the link between them and neurodegenerative disease?
The cannabinoids?
Yeah.
Well, we don't know.
Where's that thought coming from?
So it's possible that cannabinoids affect fatty acids, which are very important for development, very important for creating myelin, the insulation around nerve cells. And so there is a potential link between how these things might maybe prevent or maybe neuroprotective, or perhaps even be used as an adjunct to other therapies. So we don't have a great idea about how they work. That's why we need to do the research.
Right.
But there is a little bit of resistance because there isn't a lot of, most research is built on other research and prior research. Yeah. And because that research base doesn't really exist for a lot of the cannabinoids, it's difficult, establishing, what dose should we use, what model should we use. And so it's a little more difficult than some more established lines of research.
Do you find that this kind of work is really politicized? Because let's say if you're working on this kind of, I guess people have a lot of strong opinions about marijuana use and all that kind of stuff. So is that something you have to think about from a research standpoint?
I try not to think about it. So far, I'm just getting started on it. Right now, I'm not funded to do it.
Okay.
I'm looking for funding to do it. I have some grants that have been submitted, have been rejected. One thing that all scientists have to get used to is rejection. But that hasn't stopped me from applying to other places. One of the things about research, in my line of research and other lines of research, is that when a grant doesn't get funded, I try not to take it personally, because there's an awful lot of good research that just doesn't have the resources to fund it. So I try to think of, not all great projects can be funded.
Yeah.
So I try not to think about the political nature of it. I hope that reviewers who review papers and grant applications don't think about the political side of things, and just try to keep it to the science and to the research, to the potential benefits of the research, the methods that are being used. Are they appropriate? Will they answer the questions that are being asked? Are they important questions to be asked in the first place? I would hope that reviewers take just that into account and don't politicize it, but you can't control what whatever everyone else is thinking.
Is that a common thing? Like, do personal feelings and stuff like that come into play in like academia and among scientists and all this kind of stuff? Or are they pretty good at keeping the science to the science and keeping their own feelings out of it?
Well, I can't speak for all scientists. I've been on NIH grant review panels. I review publications as well. I try to take my personal biases out of the equation, but we all come in with a set of biases. We try to put those aside and take the science for what it is, but I can't speak for everyone. When I review a grant, when I review a publication, I try to keep my biases out of it and just focus on what the authors are trying to say. But it's sometimes difficult, especially if it's near, the research topic is near and dear to your heart.
Yeah.
It's sometimes difficult to keep those biases out. We should try our best to do it, and I hope that other reviewers try to do the same thing.
Okay. Interesting. One thing I wanted to ask you about is that from amongst that, you do a bunch of different things in terms of your outreach, right? So you have like the television stuff you did and the books you've written. It seems you've written like quite a few books. Do you like writing? Like, I saw the book, the Neuroscience Haikus.
Yeah.
So do you just enjoy writing? I guess you said one of your parents was an English teacher. Does it go back to that, or?
No. I guess I don't know.
See, I asked because a lot of scientists just hate writing, right? When I talk to a lot of scientists and engineers and everything, they're like, Writing is like that thing you have to do, but nobody wants to do it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you've like read a few books and everything.
Well, it was another way I thought of getting the information out to people. And so writing a book like Neuroscience Haiku or writing other books for a general audience, it is a different style of writing than for a grant application or for a scientific paper. So it's a different kind of writing. For me, they're two different things. I mean, sitting down to write a scientific paper is not like sitting down and writing one of these books. So it's kind of fun. I mean, I've even written a cookbook. In fact, during the summer, I've shared a cookbook with some of the students. It was a student cookbook for students who don't know how to cook. And so and so I'm also working on a novel. It's only about 50 pages.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's only about 50 pages now.
What's the novel about?
The novel is about a boy who discovers that he has some kind of magical powers to grow things.
To grow things.
To grow things. Yeah, some magical powers to grow things. And
if you're interested in growing things, you have the little samples from your garden that you can bring for us in the morning.
That's right. Yeah. Today I brought in some mint. I brought in some other herbs that I grow in my garden. Yeah, but this story is just it's a fiction about a little boy who grows up and has these magical powers to grow things, and some of the trials and tribulations he goes throughout his life. But writing a book like that is, and unfortunately I think it's been several. To be honest with you, it's been several months since I've gone back, since I've written the last word of that, and it's only just begun. But it's much different than writing science, and so it's an escape for me.
Okay.
It's an escape, and so taking time to do that allows me to, cut off, regular work and do something completely different.
Right. Okay. I think I'm starting to understand a little bit better. What you said is so true, that everyone I've talked to has like a really different background, and the experiences are just so different. Definitely no cookie cutter kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the one thing that is common though, that is really interesting to me, is that almost everyone will point back to one teacher they had in like high school or like or middle school, undergrad, and they'll say, this teacher, I remember this teacher's name.
Mm-hmm.
And some experience there kind of just got me going. So it's just really interesting to think that something like that will carry over for so long, because for you and a lot of other individuals, it's been so many years, and you still remember.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I can probably remember 3 or 4 different people who had a direct impact on my career trajectory, and they're not just my mentors in graduate school or my postdoc, but even before that. The one other professor who I didn't follow in his path, but he was a professor at UCLA. He was a marine biologist, and this is before I changed direction. And he was one that he told me that he would spend the summers in the South Pacific doing experiments, and he would dive down, and his research was on how shrimp follow food trails.
Interesting. Okay.
And he was discussing it, and I thought that was the most fantastic thing that anybody could ever do. Spending your 3-4 months out in the field investigating how shrimp find their food.
Yeah.
That just seemed to me such a fantastic thing to do.
That does sound like it'd be pretty fun, but always I guess to people who aren't scientists, I struggle to justify people are gonna ask all right, why are you doing this? What's the point of monitoring mollusk mating habits or something? And it's that's so obscure. What are you gonna do with that?
Right.
But so I imagine it must be really hard to write those types of grants. I don't know how they do it.
I am not now studying how shrimp find their food, but some people still are, and there's still so much out there in the natural world that we don't understand.
Yeah.
The brain is a great example of things that we don't understand. We know much about the brain, but there's so much more we don't know about the brain than what we do know about the brain.
But I feel like it's pretty easy to sell someone on neuroscience, because like you said, everybody has a brain. It's really important. And it's important for people to know about it. One thing that I was also interested in is you've written a book. I forget the title, but basically it was about investigating solutions for worries and anxiety and stuff like that, right?
Right.
So what was the thought process behind that? Do you think neuroscience or knowledge about how the brain works, is that something that the layperson, the everyday person can integrate into their own life and how they approach things?
Yeah, I do. So that book was called "Worried: A Scientific Investigation of Everyday Concerns." I think.
Yeah.
And the idea of that book was actually Lise Johnson. So she was the Center for Neurotechnology. What was her undergraduate research manager, I think was her title while she was here, and she's now a professor at Rocky Vista University in Colorado. That book was her idea, and she has 2 little kids, and so she was worried a lot about what she had a lot of worries for her kids. Are they going to eat lead paint chips? What kind of pajamas? Are they going to be flammable? And is the chemical? So it was her idea to write this book. And then she invited me to co-author that book with her, and we divided up chapters and things like that. So learning about why we worry in itself is not bad. So worrying starts to be a problem when it interferes with our daily life. So we should worry about a test we're going to take. We should worry about making sure we have a driver's license.
I think most people don't see it that way, though. Most people would rather not worry at all.
But if you don't worry at all, you could get into trouble.
Yeah.
So if you don't worry about a test, maybe you won't study for that test.
Right.
So a little bit of worry is good. It's when worry interferes with your normal behavior, then with your social activities, with other things like that. Then it's time to worry about worrying, which is another worry. But worrying in itself is not bad. It's when worrying interferes with your normal everyday life that it gets into trouble. But that book has received, I think, a good showing. A lot of people, whenever we talk about the books, they say, "Hey, did you talk about X?" And for example, in the book, we don't talk about climate change. We don't talk about nuclear war. Some of these big things. And maybe those particular topics will be volume 2 of the Worry book. But we didn't talk about everything. But I think it's a fun book. It's a short read because you can read individual chapters. They're only about 5 or 7 pages for each of the 50 or 60 different worries in the book.
Yeah. Okay. I had a thought. I forgot what I was going to say.
And there's a couple more books that I worked as a consultant that they're coming out. They're mainly for high school students, maybe upper middle school students, that focus on more emotional behavior. So why do we laugh?
That's
why do we get angry? Why do we cry? That type of thing. And so I didn't write these books, but I acted as a consultant, making sure that the science was correct. And again, they're making sure that the language is understandable to that age. And it's a series of about 6 books. I think it will be released in 2020 sometime. Yeah. But it's another way to get some of the science information to an audience like kids who are still making these decisions about what direction they might go in their lives.
Yeah. So when you're talking about like stuff like emotion or you're from a scientific perspective, and you're looking at really breaking these things down. I think a lot of people, they find it difficult to do because in a sense, it's like kind of breaking down the sanctity of your emotions. Your emotions are being broken down into these like processes, chemical processes in your brain and everything. And I think it becomes like a really philosophical question for people, like about their sense of self, their identity, their personalities. Is that something you've had to like struggle with when you study neuroscience, or when you teach people when you teach neuroscience to people, especially younger kids?
Well, I think that not so much the younger kids, because that's, I think, a topic that for adults is hard to understand.
Profound, I guess, yeah.
But one audience that has an extreme interest in this is a group that I've been teaching for the past 7 or 8 years. And this was I was invited to go to India to teach Tibetan Buddhist monks and nuns. And they have a very strong interest in the brain, and specifically in consciousness. They have some very different ideas about consciousness. I think that far exceed Western thought on consciousness.
Oh, interesting.
And there are some beliefs that they have that are very different than Western science. For example, perhaps the one that is most difficult for me to understand is that they do not believe that you can get consciousness, which is immaterial, from something material like the brain. Now, my own belief is that consciousness somehow, I don't know how, somehow consciousness arises from the brain.
Yeah.
They do not believe that.
Right.
They believe that consciousness is, there's something more than just that. And I can't, I can argue with them, but I can't prove that they're wrong.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting population to speak with because they have very different ideas about some of these concepts that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
In fact, the first thing that I've gone there and I've talked to different groups for the past 7 or 8 years, and invariably, after my very first lecture about the history of neuroscience, the question is, Dr. Chudler, after we die, where does the mind go?
Huh.
And that's a very difficult question for me to answer because I don't know.
Yeah.
As a scientist, I don't know what experiment would answer that question.
Right.
So my response has always been, and they ask me every single year I go, that question. And every single year, I'm no closer to answering it, so I always say, I don't know.
So what are the ideas that you say that you find are, I guess, superior to Western thought? I'm a little bit interested in that.
I don't know so much if they're superior, they're just different. So, I mean, a belief that they and other people have is reincarnation as well.
Yeah.
Is that the mind somehow gets back to a physical being.
Mm-hmm.
And again, as a scientist, I don't know how to respond to that.
Yeah.
In that I don't know what experiment I would do to say if that was
it's
true.
It's
or
not something observable.
It's not something observable, and
Yeah.
so for me that kind of a question is outside science.
Yeah.
And it's belief. I don't know if it could be true. It might not be true. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I can't say that they're wrong and that I'm right. Their belief is no more valid than my own.
Right.
So something like that is just very, very difficult. And science, we don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
I mean, the next question that they ask me after the one about where does the mind go is where in the brain is consciousness? Because they don't believe that it. And again, I say, well, scientists we're looking for it.
Yeah.
I mean, just down the road, not so many miles from here, is the Allen Institute.
Christoph Koch, right?
He's looking for it. But do we know where it is? Do we know how it's done? Not yet.
Yeah.
We don't know. So my answer again is I don't know. And there was one year I went that a group of monks, they don't speak very much English. They came up to me with a translator, and the monk said through the translator is that they were very disappointed in me.
Okay.
And I was somewhat shocked, and I didn't think I broke a taboo or I said something to insult them. And I said, what did I do? And they said, every time that the monks ask you a difficult question, you keep on saying you don't know. And I said, well, that's okay. I mean, it's okay for a scientist to say, I don't know, because saying I don't know leads to questions that maybe can be answered.
Right.
So if I say I don't know, it's really true. I don't know.
I think that's really important because I think for a lot of people, they see science as like this universal arbiter of truth or whatever, right? Like, everything, I can get all my truths from science. But whenever I talk to actual scientists, they'll be the first to tell me there's a lot of things science can't measure, that science can't definitively, answer for.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And sometimes the public might look at scientists as having all the answers. I think we have more questions than we have more answers. And perhaps we do have lots of answers. I mean, when you look at the medical advances that have been made, I mean, the diseases that have been cured, science is a path that can give us answers, can give us solutions.
Yeah.
But at this point in time, I would agree with you. There are some questions that science is not well equipped to answer. And so it may be by looking at some of these other cultures, perhaps by looking at some of the practices that Tibetan Buddhists do, perhaps by looking at how they approach some of these questions, maybe that can feed into some of our Western science. Maybe.
Right. I want to ask you now something that's a little bit of a more, I guess, profound question. It's a very simple question, but it's something that I've struggled with, and I'm curious to see how you're going to answer it. But what is the purpose of education?
What is the purpose of education? I would think the purpose of education is to make us better, to make everyone better. I mean, I just don't mean make our health better, but to improve our relationships with people, to improve our environment, to improve ourselves.
So, okay.
And I think that by the gathering of knowledge and by, it's not just facts and figures, but it's the process of learning that can help us be better.
But
be better
what
people.
is better?
Well, that's, I think, a relative term.
Yeah.
I think by better would mean happier, maybe more self-aware, more aware of others. I think that again, facts and figures are one thing, but how to interact with other people is as important as knowing dates and places and times.
Yeah.
So I think that's, in my own opinion, education is to make us just better people.
Yeah. Well, the question is coming from me thinking about, the education system we have and about all the different types of knowledge there is out there. You have history, you have philosophy, science, all kinds of stuff out there. Different kinds of thinking, different kinds of knowledge, different kinds of, I guess, production or work that's done. And in assessing the educational system, you can say, okay, right now the education system does a good job of, I guess, creating these people who can, do a lot of math, who can, solve your equations and write your code or whatever. But I think almost everyone will agree that there's something wrong, something missing, something that needs to improve. And so that led me to ask, well, what are we trying to achieve with education? What is it that we're going for? If we're like, what is the deeper, purpose behind asking questions? So, I find it, difficult to answer because there's all these different things involved, and it's like, how do you incorporate all of that?
Right. Well, I think by making us better, and perhaps I can borrow something from the Tibetan Buddhists, and that is how to make us more compassionate, how to relate to other people in such a way that brings us all up together. So, and again, it's not by learning facts and figures and dates and places, but how to get along. How to just those basics of how to get along, and it's not. I mean, and it can go further for the specifics. Like if you're an engineer, how to make a better bridge or how to make a better neural interface.
Right.
I mean that's all nice and fine, but to do that, we all have to learn to get along. Because we all can't, we can't do some of these fantastic things that science provides us alone. It's a group effort, and unless we all get along, we're not going to move forward. And I think that's what education should be doing for us, is teaching us how to get along, because we can't all be experts on everything, and we're going to have to learn from other people.
Okay, maybe we need a class on that. UW class, how to get along with people.
Well, the instructor should probably be a Tibetan Buddhist monk.
Yeah, interesting. So, I guess that's the point of education, but putting it that way, there's really not a lot that's actively done towards that, I guess, in schools and institutions, at least that I don't see. But
I certainly have not taken a class on that, but like you were in the library when you were a little kid, reading books, talking to other people, listening to podcasts about other people's opinions,
right.
Debating these things, debating the issues, respecting everyone else's opinion. I think can all make us better.
Okay. I guess it has to be. I guess a better is such a difficult thing to define. You almost have to like self-define it as like progress of some kind.
I would agree with you. I mean, just like consciousness, if you ask 10 different people about what does it mean to be conscious, if you ask 10 different people what does it mean to be better, you would come up with 10 different answers.
Yeah.
And so you're right. I think the definition is difficult, but perhaps if everyone came up with their own definition and worked toward that goal,
Right.
maybe we can all rise.
So I guess maybe the takeaway is that, like you said, the facts and figures are kind of the results of the science you do and everything. But maybe it's not so much about that, it's just about kind of the process of doing it. Just, going through the knowledge, and maybe that answers why a lot of the knowledge that might not be beneficial to, humans might, like, maybe it's not really not going to help us to know, how shrimp find their food or whatever. But maybe just the process of doing the science, of engaging with that, of engaging with the curiosity, the wonder that comes with it, maybe that's kind of the point of it.
I think so. I think that's true, and a lot of people don't understand the process, and the process of science. And I think that if they did, perhaps a lot of misinformation that exists in the world today perhaps can be cast aside if they understood how information is gathered, how to critically analyze that information, because all sources of information should not be weighed equally.
Yeah.
And a lot of people just don't understand how to weigh different sources of information. And so there are starting to be some classes in that. In fact, just in today's newspaper, the University of Washington just got a $5 million grant to create a new center. You might look it up. They get just today a center to evaluate information.
Okay.
If you go, just
is it
today.
Like the informatics school or something?
It is. I think it is based on that.
Look it up. I want to look it up right now.
Yeah, they just got a new grant, and it's being headed by the two professors who have the class about critically analyzing information. So they just got a grant.
Right. Is this that famous class? What's it called? Calling BS?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
that's it. So they're at least one of those professors is leading up this new center with a grant.
Here it is. University of Washington to create UW Center for an Informed Public.
That's it.
$5 million investment from the Knight Foundation.
That's it.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that's it. So perhaps there will be classes now.
I guess it should be, huh? Like, we have all this information here. We have the data. It's like, all right, what do you make of it now?
What do you make of it? You're right. And how to critically look at that information to find out what is true versus what is not true. Because these days of the internet, anybody can put whatever they want up there.
Yeah.
And it's important that people look at that information and be able to critically analyze who's saying it, why they're saying it, where they're saying it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very important. And that's part of education too, to be able to critically analyze the world.
Yeah.
I mean, in a perhaps in a nice way.
Right. Do you think grades are important? You said your dad wanted to get rid of grades entirely. What do you think of that?
Well, he replaced grades with written reports. So teachers didn't like it because they had to write paragraphs about each student. So it's not that it was. Yes, I believe that grades are not important, but that's not to say that evaluation is unimportant. Rather, evaluation is very important because that's the only way that a student is going to get feedback.
Yeah.
But having a letter grade or a number grade really doesn't provide much information. But rather, if an instructor provided a written, some narrative about what this particular student's strengths were, what a particular student's weaknesses were, that would provide so much more information than a 3.3 or a 3.1 or the letter B, which provides no information whatsoever. So when my dad did this, certainly the teachers didn't like it because they spent a lot more time evaluating their students. Mm-hmm. But they got to really know their students' strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
Certainly at a university class, some of the large classes with 100, 200, 300 students, that would be difficult.
Yeah.
So, but perhaps a smaller school or smaller classes could institute something like this.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you're teaching kids, right? And I'm thinking about this idea of grades, and I guess grades, when you're a kid, you don't really care about them. So do you think that makes it easier for them to learn? Because honestly, it's something I'm really sick of at this school is whenever I meet students and we're talking about something, or let's say I'm doing homework with one of the other students, right? We're working on a problem, and I'm like, I have some question or curiosity or whatever, and I'm like, what do you guys think of this? And they look at me and they'll be like, is it on the exam?
Yeah.
Right? And I'm like, okay, guys, always, whenever anything that's not on the exam is not important.
Right.
If it's on the exam, it's important. Let me just remember it until the exam. And if it was last quarter, I don't remember it because I don't have to take an exam on it anymore. And it just really seems like it's terrible. You're going through years this way and you're just forgetting things. And I think I've fallen into that too sometimes because like I try to think back to like stuff I learned freshman year and all that. And some of the stuff I don't remember very well, and maybe that's because I was too fixated on the grade.
Right.
So it's just really frustrating to me. I want to be able to remember what I learned, really learn it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, some of it has to do maybe with the individual motivation of a student about why they're in a particular class. Some students are in a particular class just to pass a particular requirement so they can go on to the next step. So they don't really care about what they're learning. But I think a student that really cares, and if you can find a topic, a class that is really of interest to a student, then that student is going to go way beyond, is it on the test?
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of making material relevant for a student so that they do go beyond, is it on a test? I mean, I remember taking classes. This is the same professor who did the following the shrimp. The shrimp following the food, is he offered optional field trips, and we would go out into the bay in Los Angeles and we would dredge the bottom on a boat and bring the stuff up.
Right.
And I just thought that was the coolest thing. It wasn't required, but I just thought that was it was fun.
Yeah.
And that wasn't on the test.
I think anyone would love to go out there and do that.
You would think, but not all the students did. I mean, it was just a handful of students who did it.
Interesting.
So I think as long as an instructor can make the material interesting, a student will go beyond it. But again, there's always students that are just in a particular class because they just need to pass.
Yeah.
And not all students are like that. In fact, I mean, look at you. I mean, you're here interviewing me right now. It's not part of your academic pathway, but it's something that is interests you. So you are going out of your way to do something extra.
Right.
So you're a great example of a student that is not just in it for the grade. You're not getting a grade for this podcast. So that's, I think it's a great example of going beyond just what's required in an academic pathway.
Mm-hmm.
So again, finding a student's passion, having them ask questions beyond the material. If it's relevant to the student, that student will go that extra step regardless of whether it's on the test or not.
Right. Well, when you say finding a passion and all that, right, I think a lot of people kind of want that. They want to have something they're passionate about that they can go after and work at. But a lot of younger people I know, especially these days, they struggle with it. Like, I don't know what my passion is. I like to play video games. I guess some of them are really into this, like streaming video games or whatever. And it's like, okay, that works for you. That's fine. Mm. But a lot of them are like, I like to do this and that. I watch TV. I watch Netflix. Play video games. I don't really know what I'm passionate about. I don't know what I'm doing. How do you? And I kind of want to encourage people to be curious, right? And I think that's kind of how I was able to get to where I am, was by having a little bit of curiosity. But it just really seems really difficult to me. Like, how do you nurture that in children? Like, right now I have an uncle that lives nearby in Bothell, and so I go visit him sometimes, and he has 2 little boys. One of them is about 5 years old, and so I try to talk to him. I talk to him about science. I talk to him about pretty much everything. I try to get him thinking about stuff. But sometimes it's difficult to get them to really have the sense of curiosity. They want to go and play on the Xbox or something, Mm-hmm. So how do you get around that in your work in educating kids and writing these books for kids and making these, like, what's your strategy for that?
Yeah. Well, I think one strategy is not just working with the kids. So a kid's going to be in a family unit, mm-hmm. and it's important that the parents are also on board. And so that the parents can also nurture the kid. Because when I go into a classroom, I'm in that classroom for maybe an hour.
Yeah.
But what I always try to do is, when I go into a classroom and I work with kids, is to leave something behind in the classroom. And so that kid can take something home and share with the family. So a very, very simple thing that I do, in fact, it came back to me one time. There's one very simple thing that I do is I illustrate the blind spot. how there's a spot on your retina which has no photoreceptors. It's a very easy demonstration to do,
Yeah.
but it's really an amazing demonstration about how the brain fills in space that is not being received. And I leave behind these little strips of paper that just have a happy face and a sad face, and you can make the sad face disappear by having it enter your blind spot. It's very easy. And I leave these bookmarks and these papers, and I show the kids how to do it. And one time when I did this, the next day I was at a meeting. It was a dinner for visiting scientists, and I had not met this guy before, but he was staying at the house, just happened to be at the house of one of the kids that I had visited that day. And this kid was showing this guy and his parents what had happened during the school day, and he was showing them how to demonstrate this blind spot. And I thought to myself, that's probably the best thing that I have ever done, because if any of your listeners who have kids, if your kid tells you what they did at school that day, you know that the teacher did a good job. Because the usual answer to the question is, what did you do at school today, is usually nothing.
Right,
so if a kid will actually tell you what happened at school, you know that the teacher has done a good job. And in this particular case, this little kid had showed his family as well as this visitor what he did at school today by demonstrating this blind spot. So somehow incorporating the family, continuing the lesson even after the kids leave the classroom. If you can instill that in the kid, then you've done a good job. Mm-hmm. So involving the family as much as possible, in addition to just the one student, I think is very, very important.
That's a good insight. That's good. Yeah. Try to think of that.
Not always easy, because oftentimes when you go into the school, the parents and the rest of the family aren't there. But if you can somehow tell the kid, when you go home, do this, and I teach them. There's a couple other tricks that I do with the kids that they can also take home, and they can share with their friends, with their families, and hopefully that creates a spark in them.
Mm-hmm. So over here at a university campus, right, a lot of professors that I see, they just want to, they're really into their research, which is good. They're very, very motivated and driven for their research, but not a lot of them care very much about teaching or, teaching their students and all that. So, I think you talked about your motivation a little bit, but how do you, I guess, separate these two parts of, your own research and, wanting to teach students? Because when I'm talking to professors or whatever, or when I'm asking a professor for something, I always try to think what's in it for them? What do they gain from, helping me in undergrad? And the answer is really hard for me to think about, because if I'm putting myself in the professor's shoes, it's undergrad is probably not going to do much for you. So...
Yeah, well, again, everyone is different. Certainly there are other professors who make teaching a priority, but here at the University of Washington, it's a big place. It's a research institution.
Yeah.
And so there are many professors who, like me, who are on soft money. That is, we don't have a state line, and that our salary is completely dependent on grant support. So many professors spend much of their time on their research grants because that's how they're paid, and they're actually not allowed to do anything else because their funding is coming from a research, and so they're not allowed to. So that may be one reason why they don't spend time in the classroom. But in my situation, and being at the center, it's allowed me to do teaching and to reach out to the community, just because the National Science Foundation makes it a priority to get out into the community and to let other people know what we're doing as a center. So being here at the center has allowed me to do that. But on the other hand, I think as a University of Washington professor, I am obligated to give back to the students and their families who are paying tuition. So it's almost like being a public servant. And that here the University of Washington is paying for the lights and paying for this nice building. And I feel that it's an obligation of professors to give back to the students who are funding the university and to the public who's funding this public university.
Yeah.
So not everyone holds that same viewpoint.
Right.
But I feel that I'm obligated to the students who are at this university.
I guess the interesting thing about a guy like you is that you wear a lot of different hats. You do a lot of different things. You're involved with the center, and you're the executive director, and all these educational programs. And I think a lot of people will struggle to do even one job, right? Even to get, out of bed in the morning and to just get going. Even sometimes I just really find it hard to find the motivation to get up and go to class, right? And I think this is a problem for a lot of people. So I'm curious to know, like, what's the thing that's keeping you, doing all these different things?
I don't know. I guess I have an optimistic point of view. I mean, I did write that worried book, and sometimes when we've been interviewed about the worried book, the interviewers ask me, so what, Eric, do you worry about? And I say, I don't really worry about too much.
Right.
I mean, and most of the worries in the book are not things that we need to worry about. I don't know. I look forward to the day. Every day is different. I mean, the students that are here this summer are great. They come with their own backgrounds, and they're all interesting people. I work with interesting people here. I can spend an hour talking to you. It's fun. I mean, being a university professor is great fun.
Right.
And I look forward to it. I just don't. Things don't bother me.
That's awesome, because it's interesting. Some people who are, really active, or who have, achieved a lot in their, lives and careers and everything, when you meet them and you talk to them, they seem like, really friendly, and like they seem like normal people. And when you see them online, it's like, all right, all this stuff, and you kind of look at them and you're like, all right, where's your engine? Where's your little demon that makes you go and do things? Where is that part of you? And I think some people, they have, some deep kind of thing motivating them. But it's really interesting to hear something like that, because I think they ask undergrads this too. Like, whenever you want to do something, you're applying for like a major, you're applying for anything, they're like, well, why are you interested in this? Why do you want to do it? And I kind of identify with what you said, because a lot of it is like, why are you doing this podcast? Well, I have a lot of reasons for it, but one of the big reasons is just it's fun. I like doing it, and I have, I guess, like a positive outlook.
Right.
And I guess it's a great thing. It's a healthy thing.
I agree completely. I mean, I would say, if you don't like what you're doing, stop it.
Yeah.
Don't do it if you don't like it. If a student doesn't like the major they're in, it's never too late to change. I mean, like I said before, I had no major for the first 2 years of college, and if I didn't like what I was doing, I would change. Similarly, my research over the years, it has changed. I didn't always do my current line of research, and as I said, being a professor, it's fun. You talk to interesting people. There's some travel involved occasionally.
Yeah.
It is a lot of work, but it's something that I enjoy, and it's different every single day. So that's, I think, what keeps me motivated, is talking to new people, learning new things. You can never stop learning, and you can never stop meeting new and interesting people. Just keep your mind open. You never know what might walk through the door.
Right. That's cool. Okay, I think we're about the end of your time, I think,
Sure.
right? So, don't want to keep you too long.
Okay.
I think that was great. That was really fun. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, good.
All right. To all of the people tuning in, thank you for listening. I guess I should put some identifying information here right now. Thank you for listening to this. Hold up. I'm going to edit this. So I'm practicing my... What's a good end? You've been on a lot of podcasts and stuff. How do they usually end it? What's a good way to do it?
Thanks everyone for listening. Hope you've enjoyed the time we've spent. I don't know.
All right, yeah. Okay, so I want to thank Dr. Chudler today for talking to me. You can read a lot more about his work online. You can pick up his books. I encourage you to pick up his books and maybe buy them for your kids if you have kids. If you are a kid, I guess you could still buy it. Don't forget to tune in on the next episode for the Center for Neurotechnology. I'm going to go around talking to the interesting, great faculty we have here. Thank you for tuning in to the IlmTech Podcast, and we are signing off now.